Commander Zefkar of the Galactic Coalition stood on the observation deck of the warship Eternal Dominion, his 4 eyes scanning the blue marble that humans called Earth. His scales shimmered under the artificial lights as he dictated his report into the neural recorder embedded in his wrist. Subject species, humans. Classification, primitive carbon-based life forms. Technological level, barely achieved faster-than-light communication. Military assessment, negligible threat. Recommendation, standard annexation protocols should suffice. Beside him, Science Officer Telmoth clicked her mandibles in what passed for amusement among her species. They still use projectile weapons, Commander. Solid metal projectiles propelled by chemical reactions. How quaint. Zefkar allowed himself a rare smile. In his 300 years of service to the Coalition, he had overseen the integration of 47 species into the galactic community. Most came willingly once they understood the benefits of membership. Those who resisted were quickly reminded of their place in the cosmic hierarchy. Humanity would be no different. The Coalition had been observing Earth for 2 decades, ever since human radio signals had leaked into space and caught the attention of a mining expedition. What they found was a species still confined to a single star system, fighting among themselves over resources and ideology. The observers had watched humans wage wars with their primitive weapons, killing each other over invisible lines drawn on maps. It was almost sad. "Deploy the negotiation team," Zefkar ordered. "Standard first contact procedures. Show them our superior technology, offer them protection and prosperity, give them 72 hours to surrender their sovereignty. And if they refuse, Commander, then we remind them why the Coalition has ruled this galaxy for 10,000 years. The first contact occurred over the skies of New York City. 3 Coalition vessels descended through the clouds, their hulls gleaming like polished obsidian. Each ship was the size of a city block, bristling with weapons that could level continents. They hovered above the United Nations building, a deliberate choice designed to demonstrate both power and diplomatic intent. General Sarah Mitchell of the United Earth Defense Force watched the feed from her command center deep beneath the Rocky Mountains. She was 53 years old, with gray hair pulled back in a tight bun and eyes that had seen too many conflicts. But nothing in her 30 years of military service had prepared her for this. "They're hailing us," the communications officer reported. "Audio and visual. Put it through." The screen filled with the image of Commander Zefkar. His reptilian features would have been frightening to earlier generations of humans, but humanity had long since imagined such beings in their fiction. What struck Mitchell most was the casual arrogance in his posture. "Greetings, humans of Earth," Zefkar began, his words translated by sophisticated AI into flawless English. "I am Commander Zefkar of the Galactic Coalition, representing an alliance of 347 species spanning 12,000 star systems. We come to offer you a choice." "We're listening," Mitchell replied, keeping her voice neutral. "Your species has reached the threshold of interstellar awareness. By galactic law, you must now choose. Join the Coalition as a protected member species, subject to our laws and oversight, or face isolation and eventual extinction. You have 72 hours to decide." Mitchell felt her jaw tighten. "And if we refuse both options?" Zefkar's smile widened, showing rows of sharp teeth. "Then you will learn why resistance is considered a terminal condition in our galaxy. We have ended civilizations far more advanced than yours, General. Do not mistake our offer of peace for weakness." The transmission ended, and the command center erupted into chaos. Advisors shouted recommendations. Politicians demanded explanations. Military officers called for immediate counterattacks. Mitchell silenced them all with a raised hand. "Get me the President, the Joint Chiefs, and every head of state who will take the call. We have 3 days to figure out if humanity is going to bow or fight." The debate that followed consumed the entire planet. News networks played the footage on endless loops. Religious leaders proclaimed it the end times or the beginning of a new age. Scientists argued about the technological gap between humanity and the coalition. Politicians calculated the costs of submission versus resistance. In the halls of power, the arguments were fierce. President Elena Vasquez sat in the Situation Room, surrounded by military commanders and civilian advisors, all speaking at once. "We have to negotiate," Secretary of State Robert Chen insisted. "They have technology we can't match. If they can cross interstellar space, what else can they do? We'd be fighting with stones against railguns." "We'd be slaves," countered General Marcus Webb, "subjects to their laws, their oversight. We'd lose everything that makes us human, our freedom, our sovereignty, our right to determine our own future." Mitchell had remained quiet throughout the debate, studying the data her intelligence teams had gathered. Finally, she spoke. "They're lying." The room fell silent. All eyes turned to her. "Explain," President Vasquez said. Mitchell pulled up a holographic display. "We've been analyzing their ships, their weapons, their formation patterns. They're impressive, yes, but they're not invincible. Look here." She zoomed in on thermal imagery of the coalition vessels. "Their power signatures suggest they're running at maybe 70% efficiency. These aren't their frontline warships. These are patrol boats, maybe light cruisers." "So what?" Chen asked. "Even their patrol boats could destroy us." "Maybe," Mitchell conceded. "But they haven't. They're hovering over our cities, broadcasting threats, giving us time to consider. If they really had overwhelming force, why waste time on negotiations? Why not just take what they want?" General Webb leaned forward. "You think they're testing us?" "I think they're used to primitive species rolling over at the first show of force. I think they've gotten complacent. And I think if we hit them hard enough, fast enough, they'll discover that humans are not like the other species they've bullied into submission." President Vasquez steepled her fingers. "You're recommending we fight?" "I'm recommending we show them what humanity does best," Mitchell said. "We adapt, we improvise, we fight dirty, and we never ever give up." The decision was made. Humanity would not bow, but they would not fight conventionally either. Mitchell gathered her top commanders and laid out a strategy that would have seemed insane to any proper military theorist. "They expect us to mass our forces, to meet them in open battle where their superior technology will crush us. So we won't do that. We'll hit them everywhere at once, with everything we have, in ways they won't expect." Over the next 72 hours, while diplomats pretended to negotiate terms of surrender, the military prepared. Not with traditional formations or standard tactics, but with every dirty trick humanity had learned from centuries of warfare. In orbit, satellites quietly repositioned themselves. On Earth, missile silos opened and closed in carefully rehearsed sequences. Submarine fleets moved to pre-planned positions. Fighter squadrons dispersed to hidden airfields. Civilian infrastructure was hardened or evacuated. Hackers from every nation pooled their expertise to probe the coalition's communication networks. When Commander Zefkar's 72-hour deadline expired, he broadcast one final message to Earth. "Your time is up, humans. What is your answer?" General Mitchell appeared on every screen across the planet. Behind her, the flags of every Earth nation hung in a display of unprecedented unity. "Our answer is no." Zefkar actually laughed. "Then you have chosen extinction. So be it." What happened next would be studied in military academies across the galaxy for generations to come. The coalition ships began their attack run, descending toward major population centers with weapons charging. Their targeting systems locked onto military installations, government buildings, communication hubs, standard protocol for a subjugation assault. Then the humans struck, not with a frontal assault, not with a desperate charge of fighters against superior vessels. Instead, the attack came from everywhere at once, in forms the Coalition had never encountered. Satellites that the aliens had dismissed as primitive communication devices suddenly activated. But they weren't communication satellites. They were kinetic kill vehicles, accelerated by chemical boosters and gravitational assists. Each one a telephone pole of tungsten moving at orbital velocities. They slammed into the Coalition ships from above, penetrating shields that were designed to stop energy weapons, but not solid mass moving at hypersonic speeds. The Eternal Dominion shuddered as 3 kinetic impactors punched through its hull. Alarms screamed across the bridge. "Shields at 40%, Telmoth shouted. "They're using ballistic weapons from orbit." "Impossible!" Zefkar snarled. "Their orbital infrastructure is primitive. How did they—" The second wave hit before he could finish. Missiles launched from submarines, from hidden ground installations, from aircraft that had appeared out of nowhere. But these weren't just explosives. Some carried electromagnetic pulse warheads that fried unshielded systems. Others released clouds of metallic chaff that blinded sensors. Still others were decoys, drawing defensive fire away from real threats. And mixed among them were the truly dangerous weapons. Nuclear warheads, not aimed at the Coalition ships but detonated in near space, creating electromagnetic pulses that cascaded across the alien vessel's systems. Plasma warheads that superheated the air around the ships, disrupting their anti-gravity fields. Chemical weapons, specifically designed to corrode the aliens' hull materials, tested on samples recovered from Coalition mining operations in the asteroid belt. Zefkar watched in disbelief as his tactical display filled with red warnings. "How are they coordinating this? We jammed their communication networks." But humanity had spent centuries learning to fight without reliable communications. Every unit had pre-planned objectives, time-synchronized attacks, fallback positions. When one attack failed, another immediately took its place. When communication was lost, commanders made independent decisions based on shared doctrine. The third Coalition ship, hovering over Tokyo, found itself surrounded by a swarm of drones. Not military drones, but civilian quadcopters, delivery drones, hobbyist aircraft, all commandeered and flown by volunteer pilots. Each one carried a small explosive charge. Individually, they were no threat. But there were thousands of them, and they attacked in coordinated waves, overwhelming point defense systems through sheer numbers. "This is madness!" Telmoth screamed as another impact rocked the bridge. "They're throwing everything at us! No tactics, no strategy, just chaos!" But it wasn't chaos. It was asymmetric warfare taken to its logical extreme. It was guerrilla tactics on a planetary scale. It was humanity doing what it had always done when faced with a superior enemy, refusing to fight fair. The Coalition ships tried to respond, but their doctrine had not prepared them for this. They had weapons that could level cities, shields that could deflect energy blasts, sensors that could track conventional military forces. But they had no defense against an enemy that attacked from every vector simultaneously, using weapons ranging from cutting-edge missiles to weaponized civilian technology. A group of civilian hackers breached the Coalition's communication network, not to steal data, but to flood it with garbage, forcing the alien ships to waste processing power-filtering signals. Chemical plants released clouds of industrial pollutants that disrupted targeting sensors. Power plants overloaded, creating electromagnetic interference. Laser communication satellites reflected and amplified ground-based lasers, turning communications equipment into improvised weapons. And through it all, the conventional military forces waited, conserving their strength, watching for openings. Commander Zefkar clutched his command chair as another explosion rocked his ship. Half his weapons were offline. His shields were at 15%. 2 of his escort vessels had been forced to retreat to high orbit, and the humans showed no signs of stopping. "Commander," his tactical officer called out. "Multiple fighter craft approaching from all vectors. Hundreds of them." Zefkar pulled up the display. Human aircraft, primitive by coalition standards, streaking toward his ship in tight formations. His point defense systems could handle them easily, but when they opened fire, they didn't use missiles or energy weapons. They used targeting lasers, bright enough to blind optical sensors. They used radar jamming, sophisticated enough to confuse the coalition's tracking systems. They used speed and maneuverability, exploiting the fact that the massive coalition ships were designed for space combat, not atmospheric dogfights. The fighters danced around the alien vessels, too fast and too close for the main weapons to track, drawing fire away from the real threats. Because while the coalition focused on the fighters, submarines launched cruise missiles from beneath the ocean. While the aliens tried to track those missiles, ground forces fired electromagnetic artillery that disrupted shield generators. While the shields flickered and failed, orbital platforms dropped kinetic impactors. It was death by 1,000 cuts, and Commander Zefkar finally understood the truth his arrogance had hidden. These humans were not primitives to be easily conquered. They were survivors who had spent their entire history fighting each other, refining the art of warfare in countless conflicts. They understood violence in a way the coalition, with its overwhelming technological superiority and 10,000 years of easy victories, had forgotten. "All ships," Zefkar ordered, his voice hollow. "Retreat to high orbit. Emergency repairs. We need to reassess this situation." As the coalition vessels limped away from Earth's atmosphere, trailing debris and venting atmosphere, General Mitchell watched from her command center. Around her, her staff erupted in cheers, but she remained quiet, studying the tactical display. They had won the first battle, but she knew this was just the beginning. The coalition would return, probably with larger fleets and harder tactics. They would have learned from this encounter. But so would humanity. And if there was one thing humans excelled at, it was learning how to kill things that wanted to kill them. She opened a channel to all military forces worldwide. "Excellent work, everyone. Begin damage assessment and prepare for round 2. We've shown them we can bite. Now let's show them we can kill." In orbit, aboard the battered Eternal Dominion, Commander Zefkar stared at Earth with new eyes. For the first time in his 300 years, he felt something he had never experienced in combat before: fear. These humans had just declared war on an empire that spanned the galaxy, and they had done it with such ferocity, such creativity, such absolute refusal to accept defeat that he finally understood the terrible mistake the coalition had made. They had not discovered a primitive species ripe for conquest. They had awakened a sleeping predator, and now that predator was angry. The emergency session of the Coalition High Council convened aboard the mobile command station Arbitrator's Will, a massive vessel that served as both parliament and fortress. The council chamber was a circular room with seats arranged in ascending tiers, each position occupied by a representative from one of the Coalition's major species. Holographic displays floated throughout the space, showing damage reports, casualty figures, and tactical analyses. Commander Zefkar stood in the center of the chamber, his scales dulled with exhaustion and shame. Around him, council members from dozens of species muttered in various languages, their translators creating a cacophony of disbelief and anger. High Counselor Vexthon, a towering crystalline being whose species had founded the Coalition millennia ago, spoke first. Her voice resonated through the chamber like wind chimes in a storm. "Commander Zefkar, you assured this council that humanity would capitulate within hours of first contact. Instead, you have returned with 3 damaged vessels, 47 dead crew members, and a humiliating tactical defeat. Explain." Zefkar straightened his posture, forcing himself to meet her faceted gaze. "High Counselor, I underestimated them. We all did. The humans possess a capacity for violence and tactical innovation that exceeds anything in our databases." "They are primitives," shouted Counselor Grathuk, a massive insectoid whose species specialized in military operations. They barely have fusion power. Their fastest ships can't exceed .3 light speed. How could they possibly challenge coalition forces? Because they don't fight like we do, Zefkar replied. Every species the coalition has encountered shares certain commonalities. We value efficiency, honor, and structured warfare. Humans value none of these things. They fight to win, by any means necessary. They use tactics we would consider dishonorable or wasteful. They sacrifice resources we would preserve. They take risks we would never consider. Vexthon's form shimmered, a sign of irritation among her species. You speak as if these qualities are advantages. In warfare, they are, Zefkar said quietly. We have grown soft, High Counselor. We have spent 10,000 years as the dominant power in this galaxy. We have forgotten what it means to face an enemy that refuses to acknowledge our superiority. The chamber erupted in argument. Some counselors demanded immediate military escalation. Others called for diplomatic overtures. A few suggested quarantining Earth's solar system and letting the humans destroy themselves, as they surely would given time. High Counselor Vexthon raised one crystalline appendage, and silence fell. The coalition has never retreated from a challenge to its authority. If we allow these humans to defy us, other species will question our strength. We will dispatch a proper battle fleet to Earth. They will learn their place, or they will cease to exist. Back on Earth, General Mitchell stood before a gathering of world leaders in a secure bunker beneath Geneva. The faces on the screens around her represented every major nation, and for the first time in human history, they were united in purpose. They'll be back, Mitchell stated flatly. Our intelligence suggests the coalition is assembling a fleet in the outer solar system. Best estimates put their arrival time at 2 weeks, and this time, they won't underestimate us. President Vasquez spoke from her screen. What are our chances, General? Mitchell didn't sugarcoat it. In a conventional engagement, 0. They have more ships, better weapons, and superior technology. Our surprise tactics worked once because they weren't expecting resistance. They'll be prepared now. Then what do you recommend? Asked Chancellor Weber of the European Federation. We don't fight a conventional engagement, Mitchell replied. We do what humans have always done when faced with a superior enemy. We change the rules. Over the next 2 weeks, Earth transformed into a fortress unlike anything in the galaxy's history. It wasn't a fortress built on static defenses and predictable strategies, but one that embraced chaos and asymmetry. Major cities were evacuated to underground shelters, massive complexes that could sustain populations for months. But the empty cities weren't abandoned. They were rigged with traps, sensors, and weapons designed to make any invasion a nightmare. Buildings became bunkers. Streets became kill zones, and every square meter was prepared for urban warfare. In orbit, the asteroid mining operations that had been quietly developing for decades suddenly revealed their true purpose. Rocks mined from the belt were positioned in carefully calculated trajectories. Some were hollowed out and filled with explosives. Others were equipped with simple maneuvering thrusters. All of them could become weapons with minimal preparation. The moon became a massive military installation. Its low gravity and lack of atmosphere made it perfect for launching kinetic weapons. Railguns were constructed in secret lunar facilities, capable of accelerating projectiles to a significant fraction of light speed. The far side of the moon, forever hidden from Earth, became a staging ground for surprise attacks. But the most dramatic changes were happening in Earth's population itself. The attack had unified humanity in a way nothing else ever had. Old enemies became allies. Resources were pooled. Knowledge was shared. Scientists from former rival nations worked side by side to reverse engineer recovered coalition technology. Military forces from different countries trained together, combining tactics and strategies. And everywhere, people volunteered. Not just soldiers, but civilians who wanted to contribute. Engineers, programmers, pilots, doctors, teachers, even children helped, creating communication networks using gaming platforms, running supply chains using delivery apps, analyzing data using social media algorithms. Captain James Rodriguez of the United Space Force stood on the bridge of the carrier Washington, one of Earth's newest warships. It had been constructed in secret over the past decade, built from parts manufactured across the globe and assembled in orbit. It wasn't as advanced as coalition ships, but it had one advantage. It was designed by humans for human tactics. "Status report," Rodriguez ordered. His tactical officer, Lieutenant Chen, consulted her displays. "All wings report ready. We have 60 fighters, 40 bombers, and 20 electronic warfare craft. Munitions are at maximum load. Crews are at battle stations." Rodriguez nodded. The Washington was one of 12 carriers Earth had managed to construct. Each one carried craft that would seem primitive to the coalition, but each one was crewed by pilots who had trained their entire lives for combat, who understood that they were outmatched and didn't care, who would rather die fighting than live as subjects. "Coalition fleet entering detection range," the sensor officer announced. "Counting, 32 capital ships, over 100 support vessels, multiple fighter wings. They're maintaining formation, approaching from solar north." Rodriguez felt his stomach tighten. The fleet they had barely survived had 3 ships. This force could sterilize the planet. "All ships," he broadcast to the Earth fleet. "Remember the plan. We can't outfight them, so we outthink them. Make them chase us. Make them divide their forces. And whatever happens, don't let them settle into a coordinated attack." The coalition fleet approached Earth with overwhelming confidence. Fleet Admiral Tharmok, a veteran of 50 campaigns, stood on the bridge of his flagship Inevitable Justice and studied the tactical displays with satisfaction. "Humans have positioned some satellites and what appear to be weapons platforms," his tactical officer reported. "Nothing that poses a significant threat." "What about their fleet?" Tharmok asked. 12 small carriers scattered throughout the orbital space, approximately 700 small craft total. They seem to be avoiding direct engagement." Tharmok allowed himself a smile. "They're running, maintaining distance while we approach. Standard behavior for an outmatched enemy. All ships advance in formation. Target their orbital installations first, then their military facilities on the ground. Once resistance is broken, we'll discuss surrender terms." The coalition fleet moved forward in perfect formation, their shields overlapping to create a nearly impenetrable defensive wall. It was a tactic that had broken countless enemy fleets. It should have worked against the humans, too. It didn't. The first indication that something was wrong came when the coalition fleet passed through what appeared to be empty space. Suddenly, their sensors went haywire. Radar showed phantom targets. Communications filled with interference. Navigation systems reported conflicting data. "What's happening?" Tharmok demanded. "Unknown, Admiral. It's like we hit a cloud of something. Our sensors are being overwhelmed with false readings." What the coalition didn't know was that Earth had seeded orbital space with millions of tiny reflectors, chaff dispensers, and signal jammers. Individually, they were invisible to scanners. Collectively, they created a sensor environment so cluttered that finding real targets became nearly impossible. While the coalition fleet struggled to sort through the noise, the human carriers launched their craft. But they didn't attack directly. Instead, they scattered in seemingly random directions, each craft taking a different trajectory. "Admiral, human craft are dispersing," the tactical officer reported. "They're not grouping for an attack run." "Ignore them," Tharmok ordered. "Focus on the military installations. Once we eliminate their ground-based weapons, their fighters will be irrelevant." The coalition ships opened fire on Earth's military bases with devastating beam weapons. Mountains were vaporized. Bunkers were melted into slag. Entire military complexes ceased to exist, but the bases were empty. Humanity had learned from the first engagement. Everything valuable had been moved, hidden, or dispersed. The coalition was destroying empty facilities while the real military assets waited elsewhere. And while they focused on those targets, the scattered human fighters completed their true mission. Each one had deployed a package during its flight. Kinetic impactors, guided by simple gravitational calculations toward pre-planned impact points. Hundreds of tungsten rods, each one accelerated to orbital velocity, each one aimed at a specific point in the coalition formation. The impacts came from every direction simultaneously, not concentrated on single ships, but spread across the entire fleet. Shields flickered and failed under the barrage. Point defense systems, already overwhelmed by sensor noise, couldn't track the incoming threats. Ships took hits to engines, weapons, sensor arrays. "Damage report," Tharmok shouted as his flagship shuddered. "Multiple impacts across the fleet. No ships destroyed, but every vessel has taken damage. Shields are depleted. Repair systems are working, but—" The second wave hit before he could finish. Missiles launched from the moon, accelerated by railguns to speeds that made interception nearly impossible. They didn't carry explosive warheads. They didn't need to. At those velocities, simple mass was enough to punch through hulls. The coalition fleet tried to return fire, but the moon's low gravity and lack of atmosphere made targeting difficult. Human defenders had centuries of experience fighting in low-gravity environments. They moved between positions constantly, fired and relocated, used the terrain to their advantage. Then, Earth's defense satellites activated. Not all at once, but in sequence, creating overlapping fields of fire that forced the coalition ships to keep their shields active in all directions simultaneously. It was a drain on their power systems, slowing their reactor recharge rates, limiting their offensive capabilities. Captain Rodriguez watched the battle unfold from the Washington's bridge. "They're taking the bait. They're trying to maintain formation while under attack from multiple vectors. They're playing defensive." "Should we press the attack?" Lieutenant Chen asked. "Not yet. Let them burn through their reserves. Let them make mistakes." Admiral Tharmok was realizing the same thing Rodriguez already knew. The humans weren't trying to destroy the coalition fleet. They were trying to exhaust it. Every time the coalition focused on one threat, another appeared. Every time they moved to engage, the humans scattered. Every time they tried to coordinate, their communications were jammed or flooded with false signals. It was maddening. It violated every principle of proper warfare. There was no honor in it, no glory, just constant harassment from an enemy that refused to face them directly. "All ships, new formation," Tharmok ordered. "We split into 3 groups. One engages the moon bases, one hunts their carriers, one maintains position over the planet. We'll eliminate their assets piece by piece." It was a sound, tactical decision. Against any normal enemy, it would have worked. But humans didn't fight normally. The moment the coalition fleet divided, Earth's forces struck in earnest. The group that moved to engage the moon found itself flying through a field of debris that the humans had positioned there decades ago. Old satellites, spent rocket stages, chunks of rock. None of it was dangerous by itself, but at orbital velocities, even small objects required careful navigation. The coalition ships slowed, their formation loosening. That's when the moon batteries opened fire in earnest, not at the ships themselves, but at the debris field, turning it into a storm of hypervelocity fragments. The coalition ships' shields, already weakened by earlier attacks, failed under the bombardment. The group hunting Earth's carriers found them, but the carriers didn't run. Instead, they turned and accelerated toward the coalition ships. It seemed like suicide. It was actually brilliant. As the carriers closed distance, They launched every fighter and bomber they had in a single massive wave. The small craft accelerated to maximum speed, far faster than the larger coalition ships could match. They zipped through the enemy formation, releasing their weapons as they passed, then breaking off before the aliens could respond. The weapons weren't designed to destroy. They were designed to disable. Electromagnetic pulse bombs that fried unshielded electronics, acid sprayers that corroded sensor arrays, adhesive foams that clogged engine vents, even simple paint bombs that covered viewports and optical sensors. And when the coalition ships tried to pursue the retreating fighters, they found themselves flying through minefields, not sophisticated mines, just simple explosives with proximity detonators. But when you're traveling at high speed in space, even a small explosion in your path can be catastrophic. The third group, maintaining position over Earth, faced the worst threat of all, the planet itself. Earth's massive industrial capacity had been turned entirely to war production. Missiles launched continuously from hidden silos, lasers fired from ground installations, electromagnetic railguns shot projectiles from locations the coalition couldn't predict. Admiral Tharmok watched his carefully planned offensive dissolve into chaos. His fleet was scattered, damaged, confused. They had superior technology, but they couldn't bring it to bear effectively. The humans were everywhere and nowhere, striking and fading, refusing to commit to a decisive battle. "Admiral," his communications officer said quietly, "we're receiving a transmission from Earth. General Mitchell wishes to speak with you." Tharmok almost refused, but something in his officer's tone made him reconsider. "Put it through." General Mitchell's face appeared on his display. She looked tired but determined, her gray hair slightly disheveled, her uniform bearing scorch marks from a nearby explosion. "Admiral Tharmok," she began without preamble, "you're losing this battle, not because we're stronger than you, but because you're fighting our kind of war now. You can keep throwing ships at us, and we'll keep finding ways to hurt you. Or you can accept that humanity is not going to submit." "You cannot win," Tharmok replied, though his voice lacked conviction. "Even if you defeat this fleet, the coalition will send another, and another. We have resources you cannot imagine." "Maybe," Mitchell acknowledged. "But ask yourself, at what cost? How many ships are you willing to lose? How many crew members have to die? And for what? To force one stubborn species into submission? Is that really worth it?" Tharmok had no answer. He looked at his tactical display, at the red indicators showing damaged ships, depleted reserves, exhausted crews. The coalition was winning, technically, but it didn't feel like winning. "I'm offering you a chance to leave," Mitchell continued. "Take your fleet, go back to your council, and tell them the truth. Tell them that humanity will never stop fighting. We'll lose battles, probably many of them. But we'll learn from every defeat. We'll adapt to every tactic. And eventually, we'll figure out how to beat you. Because that's what humans do. We survive." The transmission ended. Admiral Tharmok stared at the empty screen for a long moment. Then he looked at his tactical officer. "Casualties? 17 ships heavily damaged. 3 will require months of repair. Casualties at 400 and climbing. And Admiral, crew morale is failing. They signed up to pacify primitives, not fight a war of attrition." Tharmok made his decision. "All ships, disengage and withdraw to Rally Point Gamma. We're leaving." As the coalition fleet limped away from Earth's solar system, Captain Rodriguez allowed himself a moment of relief. They had done it. Against impossible odds, humanity had fought the galaxy's dominant power to a standstill. But as he looked at the damage reports flooding in, as he saw the lists of casualties, the destroyed facilities, the expended resources, he knew this victory was temporary. The coalition would debate their options. They would analyze this defeat, learn from it, and eventually return. But they would return to face a humanity that had also learned. that had also adapted. And the next time, the galaxy was going to discover something terrifying about humans. They got better with practice. The Coalition High Council chamber was silent as Admiral Tharmok finished his report. The holographic displays showed the brutal truth. A fleet of 32 capital ships had been driven away by a species that shouldn't have been able to challenge a single patrol vessel. The mathematical projections were even worse. If the Coalition committed the forces necessary to guarantee victory through overwhelming power, the cost would be astronomical. High Counselor Vexthon's crystalline form glowed with barely contained fury. Unacceptable. In 10,000 years, no species has successfully resisted the Coalition. If word of this defeat spreads, it will encourage rebellion across the galaxy. Then perhaps, a new voice interjected, we are asking the wrong question. Every being in the chamber turned to look at the speaker. Counselor Etheron, a gaseous entity whose species rarely spoke in council sessions, had emerged from his containment unit. His translated voice carried an analytical tone that cut through the emotional atmosphere. We have approached this problem as a military issue, Etheron continued. Primitive species resists, therefore we crush them. But consider, what makes the humans different? Why do they fight when every other species has seen reason? They're irrational, Graphic snapped. Suicidal. They throw away resources on futile resistance. Or, Etheron suggested, they value something we have forgotten. Freedom, self-determination, the right to make their own mistakes. The Coalition offers peace and prosperity, but at the cost of sovereignty. Most species accept this trade. Humans do not. Perhaps instead of breaking them, we should ask, what if we made them partners instead of subjects? The chamber erupted in argument. The idea was radical, potentially revolutionary. The Coalition's entire structure was based on hierarchical integration. Member species contributed resources and followed directives in exchange for protection and technological advancement. Allowing humans equal partnership would set a dangerous precedent. But Vexthon raised an appendage, and silence fell once more. The Council will debate this proposal. Admiral Tharmok, you are dismissed. Commander Zefkar, remain. The Council wishes to discuss your initial assessment of humanity's capabilities. Zefkar stood in the center of the chamber, knowing his career was likely over. He had been wrong about humanity, and in the Coalition's meritocratic system, mistakes had consequences. But Vexthon surprised him. Commander, your error was not in underestimating human military capacity. It was in misunderstanding what drives them. You saw primitive weapons and assumed primitive thinking. What did you learn from your encounters with humanity? Zefkar considered carefully before answering. That they are fundamentally different from every species we have encountered. Every Coalition member species evolved toward social cooperation and collective decision-making. It's the natural path for any species that achieves interstellar capability, but humans evolved as persistence predators on a death world. They are individuals first, collectives second. They compete as much as they cooperate, and when threatened, they don't calculate odds. They fight. Are they negotiable? Vexthon asked. Yes, Zefkar replied, but not from a position of weakness. They will never submit to force. However, they might accept partnership if treated as equals. 6 months after Admiral Tharmok's withdrawal, a single Coalition vessel approached Earth. It transmitted peaceful intentions and requested diplomatic discussions. After intense internal debate, Earth's government agreed to meet. The conference took place aboard a neutral station constructed in the space between Earth and Mars. General Mitchell led the human delegation, accompanied by diplomats, scientists, and military advisors. Commander Zefkar led the Coalition representatives, having been appointed as liaison due to his experience with humanity. The first session was tense. Both sides remained armed, guarded, suspicious. But they talked. The Coalition cannot simply allow humanity to exist outside our structure, Zefkar explained. Galactic law requires all spacefaring species to either join or be quarantined. There is no third option. Then change your law, Mitchell replied bluntly. Humanity won't be quarantined and we won't be conquered. Find another option or we'll create one ourselves. Such as? Mitchell leaned forward. An alliance, not membership in the Coalition, but a partnership between equals. We share technology, coordinate on mutual threats, respect each other's sovereignty. You get access to human innovation and military tactics. We get access to galactic resources and knowledge. Nobody rules anyone. The Coalition delegation exchanged glances. The concept was alien to their hierarchical thinking, but not impossible. The Council would never agree, one of the alien diplomats protested. Other species would demand similar arrangements. Maybe they should have them, suggested Dr. Sarah Winters, Earth's chief scientist. The Coalition has been running the same system for 10,000 years. Maybe it's time for an upgrade. You've achieved peace and stability, but at the cost of innovation. You've grown stagnant. Humans can't offer you better weapons or faster ships. But we can offer something more valuable. New perspectives. The negotiations continued for weeks. Slowly, painfully, both sides began to understand each other. The Coalition learned that humanity's refusal to submit didn't stem from irrationality, but from deeply held values formed over millennia of history. Humans learned that the Coalition's rigid structure wasn't tyranny, but the result of genuine desire to prevent the kind of conflicts that had nearly destroyed several member species. They found common ground in mutual self-interest. The Coalition needed fresh strategic thinking. Their military doctrine had calcified over centuries of easy dominance. Humans needed access to advanced technology and galactic resources. Both sides needed to end a conflict that benefited neither. The breakthrough came during an informal discussion between Mitchell and Zefkar, sitting alone in an observation lounge overlooking Mars. "Tell me something," Mitchell asked. "Why did you really come back? After we beat you twice, why not just quarantine our system and forget about us?" Zefkar's scales shifted color, a sign of embarrassment. "Because you terrify us. A species barely capable of interstellar travel fought a Coalition fleet to a standstill. What will you be capable of in 100 years? 1,000? The Council realized we had two options. Destroy you now while we still can, or find a way to ensure you're allies rather than enemies. Some councilors pushed for extermination. Others argued for partnership. Partnership won by a narrow margin." Mitchell nodded slowly. "You're right to be terrified. If you'd tried to exterminate us, we would have scattered throughout the galaxy and spent however long it took to come back and destroy you. Humans are excellent at holding grudges." "And excellent at forgiveness, apparently," Zefkar replied, gesturing at their current negotiations. "Your species is contradictory. You fight like demons, then extend olive branches. You create weapons of mass destruction, then debate the ethics of using them. You kill each other over tribal differences, then unite when facing external threats. How do you live with such contradictions?" Mitchell smiled. "We don't resolve them. We embrace them. That's what makes us human. We're capable of great cruelty and great compassion, often simultaneously. It's messy, inefficient, and occasionally insane. But it's also what makes us adaptable. We can be whatever the situation requires." The final agreement, known as the Terra Accords, was unlike any treaty in Coalition history. Humanity would not join the Coalition as a member species. Instead, Earth would become the first independent ally, with sovereign control over their territory and affairs. In exchange, humans would provide military training and tactical consultation to Coalition forces. They would share their research on adaptive warfare and rapid innovation. The Coalition would provide humanity with access to faster-than-light travel technology, energy generation systems, and medical advances. They would open trade relationships and cultural exchanges. And most importantly, they would guarantee Earth's independence and recognize humanity's right to expand throughout their region of space. But the most revolutionary clause was the reform provision. Over the next century, the coalition would gradually restructure itself to allow other species the option of independent alliance rather than hierarchical membership. The human model would become available to any species that proved capable of mutual cooperation. Not all coalition members accepted this change peacefully. Several conservative factions argued that the Terra Accords would destroy the coalition's stability. Some species, particularly those who had submitted to coalition authority without resistance, resented humanity's special status. The first major test came 3 years after the Accords were signed. The Korvax hegemony, a militant species from the galactic south, launched a surprise invasion into coalition space. They had been observing the human conflicts and concluded that the coalition had grown weak. A force of 50 warships struck at a lightly defended coalition colony world. The coalition responded with their traditional approach: massive fleet deployment, overwhelming force, methodical advance. It should have worked. Instead, the Korvax used guerrilla tactics, hit-and-run attacks, and asymmetric warfare. They had learned from watching humanity, and they were applying those lessons with devastating effect. Desperate, the Coalition Council activated the Mutual Defense Clause of the Terra Accords. Within days, a human task force arrived in the combat zone, led by now Admiral Rodriguez aboard the Washington. The Korvax commanders watched the human fleet approach with confidence. They had studied the battles between Earth and the Coalition. They knew human tactics. They were prepared. They were wrong. What the Korvax didn't understand was that human military doctrine was never static. While they had been studying Earth's defensive battles, humanity had been learning from the Coalition, integrating alien technology with human tactics, creating something entirely new. The Washington and its sister ships didn't charge in with guns blazing. Instead, they deployed observation platforms throughout the combat zone. These platforms, combining human sensor technology with coalition power systems, created a real-time tactical picture more detailed than anything either species could achieve alone. Then the human ships simply stopped. They maintained position at maximum range and waited. "What are they doing?" the Korvax fleet commander demanded. "Are they afraid to fight?" His tactical officer frowned at the sensor readings. "I don't know, sir. They're not advancing or retreating. They're just observing us." For 6 hours, nothing happened. The Korvax fleet maintained their position, unwilling to advance into potential traps. The human fleet waited, gathering data. The coalition forces held back, trusting their allies. Then Rodriguez gave the order. "All ships, execute Synchronized Strike Plan Alpha." What happened next was something the galaxy had never seen before. The human fleet launched missiles. But these weren't the simple kinetic weapons they had used against the Coalition. These were equipped with Coalition-designed warheads, human-designed guidance systems, and targeting data compiled from hours of observation. Every missile knew exactly where its target would be, what course corrections it would make, how its defenses would respond. The attack was so precisely calculated that the Korvax point defense systems were overwhelmed within seconds. Half their fleet took critical damage in the opening salvo. Before they could recover, Coalition ships moved in, their traditional heavy weapons finding targets that had been perfectly positioned for them by human tactical planning. The combination was devastating. Human precision with Coalition firepower. The battle lasted 47 minutes. The Korvax fleet was completely destroyed, with minimal casualties on the Coalition human side. It was the most one-sided victory in modern galactic history. News of the battle spread throughout the galaxy at faster-than-light speeds. The message was clear: the Coalition had not grown weak. It had gained a new strength. The humans had not replaced Coalition doctrine, they had enhanced it, creating a hybrid approach more effective than either system alone. Other species began to reconsider their strategies. Some approached Earth with requests for similar alliances. Others withdrew from aggressive posturing, realizing the galaxy had changed. A few species, inspired by humanity's success, began developing their own variations on asymmetric tactics. The galactic balance of power was shifting, and humanity stood at the center of that shift. Back on Earth, General Mitchell stood in the same command center where she had orchestrated humanity's defense 5 years earlier. But now, instead of looking at defensive positions and desperate tactics, she was reviewing expansion plans. Human colonies were being established on worlds throughout the local sector. Human trading ships were visiting alien markets. Human scientists were collaborating with coalition researchers. President Vasquez appeared on the communication screen. The Federation of Free Worlds just formally requested membership. That makes 17 independent species who want to join our alliance rather than the coalition. How did we become the center of a political movement? Mitchell smiled. We didn't start a movement, Madam President. We just refused to give up. Other species saw that and realized they had a choice. The coalition kept everyone safe, but they also kept everyone small. We showed the galaxy that you can be both safe and free. The Coalition Council isn't happy about it, Vasquez noted. They're losing members. They're not losing members, they're gaining equals, Mitchell corrected. Species aren't leaving the coalition, they're changing their relationship with it. Vexthon understands that. She's been pushing reforms from inside. In 20 years, the coalition might not even resemble what it was. Because of us. Because we refused to bow, Mitchell agreed. Because we fought when we should have lost. Because we made them see that there was another way. Commander Zefkar, now serving as Earth's permanent liaison to the Coalition Council, stood in the observation deck of a human space station orbiting Titan. He was watching a joint training exercise between human and coalition forces, marveling at how quickly both groups had learned to work together. A human officer, Lieutenant Chen from the Washington, approached him. Commander, you look thoughtful. Something wrong? Not wrong, Zefkar replied. I was just remembering the first time I saw Earth. I thought humanity was primitive, weak, insignificant. I recommended standard annexation protocols. Chen laughed. And instead we kicked your ass. Twice. Indeed, Zefkar's scales shifted to a color that indicated amusement. But I realize now that my mistake wasn't tactical. It was philosophical. I assumed that military power determined worth, that technological advancement was the measure of a civilization, that any species less developed than us needed to be guided, controlled, or conquered. And now? Now I understand that worth is not measured in weapons or technology. It's measured in spirit, in determination, in the refusal to surrender what makes you who you are. The coalition was founded on noble principles: peace, cooperation, mutual advancement. But over millennia, we forgot that these things must be chosen, not imposed. You reminded us of that. Below them, human and alien pilots flew in perfect formation, combining their different strengths into something greater than either could achieve alone. It was a metaphor for what the galaxy was becoming. You know, Chen said thoughtfully, when the coalition first showed up, I was terrified. I thought it was the end of everything, but maybe it was actually the beginning. The beginning of what? Zefkar asked. Of humanity finding its place in the galaxy, not as conquerors or subjects, but as partners, as equals, as friends. Zefkar looked at the young human officer and felt something he never expected to feel toward what he once considered a primitive species. Respect. Deep, genuine respect. Lieutenant Chen, I believe you are correct, and I believe the galaxy will be better for it. 50 years later, historians would mark humanity's first contact with the coalition as a turning point in galactic history. Not because of the battles, though those were studied extensively. Not because of the technology exchange, though that accelerated human development by centuries. But because humanity proved something the galaxy had forgotten, freedom matters, dignity matters, the right to choose your own path, even if it's harder than the path others would choose for you, matters. The Galactic Coalition still existed, but it had transformed. No longer a hierarchy of dominant and subject species, it had become a true alliance of independent civilizations. The Terra Accords became the template for a new kind of galactic order, one based on mutual respect rather than imposed authority. And humanity, the species that should have been easily conquered, the primitives who barely had fusion power when the coalition arrived, had become one of the most influential civilizations in known space. Not because they were the strongest, not because they had the best weapons, but because when faced with impossible odds, when told to submit or die, they had looked the galaxy's dominant power in the eye and said one simple word: no. And the galaxy would never be the same.